Hello and welcome everybody. I'm Catherine Asbury, co-head of the Department of Education, and I'm just going to give a little bit of housekeeping before passing over to Tracy Lightfoot, who's going to do a proper welcome. So I'm going to be like the woman in The Everyman who reminds you to switch off your phones, enjoy the film, enjoy the popcorn, but yeah, phones off please. We are not expecting a fire drill, so if there is a fire alarm, I'm doing a variety of job roles here. And yes, please join us for drinks and Christmas canapes afterwards. But I'd like to welcome Tracy Lightfoot.
So welcome everybody, and I realise it's a damp, miserable evening in York, but I'm sure these two are going to light it all up with what they do. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tracy Lightfoot and I'm the Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Teaching, Learning and Students at the university. It's not often when the Vice-Chancellor says, can you pick up something for me, that it's actually something that I'm actually delighted to be doing, and actually I'm really pleased to be here. So it's one of those things that got passed on, I couldn't be happier to do. So I'm really delighted to welcome you here today to listen to not one, but two inaugural lectures from two of our newest professors. And I'm delighted to say that I have the opportunity to work with them closely in their roles across the university. Not only are they great educators and innovators, but they give their all to the university and to key stakeholders and partners as well, in order to support staff and students alike and to ensure that we're providing opportunities for all to succeed. They're both exceptional leaders and of inspiration to the next generation of TNS colleagues, and I really feel very honoured and privileged to work with them on so many different projects and activities. And the fact that so many of you here today is just testimony to your approaches to working as part of teams and commitment for all of what you do, which I want to thank you on behalf of the university. So I know we've got two of the introducers that's going to say a little bit more about the two, but I'm just going to say a couple of words about each of them. I don't often get to do this publicly. So I've known Jill for quite a number of years now, first crossing paths when we set up our online programmes with our external partner. It was interesting times, a new venture for the university, and Jill was the lead with a close colleague in the then York Management School. She may look meek and mild, but wow, fiery was perhaps of an understatement. And we still talk about it with our external partner now about the meetings that we had in those early days. But she made sure it happened, and that commitment and determination made sure that those programmes launched and were high quality, and they are still going strong. And it was that steady determination to do things right and get them done that shone through as it does today. And all that Jill does in her role as Associate Dean for Teaching, Learning and Students in Social Sciences, and in particular about her leadership on inclusive learning and building on our external profile too. So, a little bit about Jill. So Claire, I've not known you quite as long in your professional capacity, but really through Jan. But we share the common pain of dealing with external regulatory bodies, their unpredictability, and their lack of actual appreciation of what universities do. And I know it's really challenging today because we have Ofsted in for those that you don't know as well. But Claire holds me and the university to account as well in a really good way to make sure we don't forget about professional programmes, such as the PGC programme that you've magnificently led over the years. But in addition to champion internally, Claire is incredibly active externally in representing the university and the teaching profession in advocating and lobbying for teacher training, how it's regulated, and ensuring we continue to provide the school teachers of the future and ones that are well trained, confident and enthusiastic about all that they're going to do. So I'm going to close there, but I'm just delighted to be here. They're going to do a fantastic job, and we are really lucky to have you both at this university leading the way. I'm going to hand over to Stephanie now and really enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's lovely to be here. For those who don't know me, I'm Steph Sullivan, Professor of Education and Deputy Head of School at the School of Education at Nottingham. I'm really delighted to be introducing Claire this evening. For those of you that don't know Claire began her teaching career when she did her PGC at Durham in, and I've got to write, 1992. She's then worked as a history teacher in the north of England and also Bristol, and she's got significant international experience as well, teaching in Kenya and completing her PhD in Calgary, Canada. Claire's been in initial teacher education for the last 2 decades, and Director of IT here at York since 2017. I've known Claire since 2017. We met when we both became external examiners at Durham University, and since then I've developed a really close working relationship with Claire in multiple spaces. When I was chair of Youth Heads Management Forum, which is Claire's role now, Claire was my vice chair. Claire's been one of our external examiners at the University of Nottingham, and we've worked very closely together as part of the Russell Group Initial Teacher Education Network. I don't know how much you know about IT. There was a little hint there about it, but the sector's been through a really turbulent time in recent years. All institutions that offer ITE have had to go through a reaccreditation process. I think we can describe that process as brutal. I don't think there's another word for it. Definitely flawed in many ways. And in lots of different spaces where Claire and I have worked together, we've had to navigate these difficulties. And I've sat beside Claire in lots of meetings with the DFE, with other policymakers, working together to offer an alternative narrative to simplistic instrumental models of ITE. And in every space I've worked alongside Claire, I've been so impressed by her knowledge and her expertise. She's able to offer very strong, very thoughtful research-led rebuttals to attempts to reduce teaching and learning to teach to a set of prescribed skills and competencies. She's able to articulate the complexities of teaching and the importance of celebrating that complexity and putting it at the heart of everything we do. IT doesn't fit neatly into traditional university systems in any way. Our term times are different, we have to respond to government policy demands, we have the joys of Ofsted, we have to work with lots of different external partners, and the list goes on and on. I think we're quite irritating and frustrating to central university systems often because we don't fit, but we're also really, really important to universities. We're the key to university civic commitments in lots of ways. We have a huge local impact, and we're the broker to lots of research and knowledge exchange activities that we do with schools and teachers. Leading IT in this complex space is really hard work, and Claire's absolutely brilliant at it. She's recognised nationally for her expertise, and colleagues across the country will come to her for her wise words and advice. I'm really proud particularly to be introducing a colleague who is becoming a professor through the teaching as opposed to the research pathway. As someone who's on an equivalent pathway in my own institution, I know there's still work to be done by universities, perhaps particularly Russell Group universities, to understand what high quality activity and outputs look like when they don't fit neatly into a referable outcome criteria. Claire's an outstanding example of somebody who clearly shows that her contribution to the knowledge base of teacher education is extensive. Both nationally and internationally she has that recognition, and her work's crucial to the sector. On a personal note, Claire's become a very good friend over the last years, bonding over dogs and walking and the odd glass of wine, possibly. But her kindness and compassion is something that I've really valued. It's a privilege to introduce her, and I'm very excited to hear what she's got to say about what a good teacher really is.
Claire.
This is a really, really fascinating thing for me to be doing because I'm not used to doing this to public audiences, so forgive me if I stumble a little as we go along. I want to start off by saying thank you to all my colleagues, a lot of whom are in the room, including colleagues I used to work with at a different institution, friends, family, for just giving me this opportunity to share some, apparently now, professorial wisdom this evening. I am very lucky also to be in a very supportive department. And I think that needs noting, and to work with colleagues whose encouragement has supported me to reach these apparently lofty heights now. So thank you for that. Thank you also to Steph for introducing me. You've just said such lovely things, and I could say the same things the other way. We were very fortunate to serendipitously sort of meet when we were externals at Durham. I kind of knew as soon as we first started chatting in that, I think it was called Chapters Coffee House on Albert Bridge, that I had a kindred spirit here who I was going to get on with professionally in life, so I'm very fortunate to have that. And, you know, alongside lots of other expert teacher education people, along the way that we've both met together. So, but it's also only right to mention that Steph has also recently become a full professor, and so we need to just sort of recognise that as well. It's very well deserved on her part. So this evening, what Jill Webb and I are going to do is share with you our thoughts on what's made us into really good teacher scholars, which is slightly different to a research-based one. And Jan is here, everybody, hooray! We come from very different vantage points, but a common theme that we have is that our professorial teaching identities are based on our prior careers as much as our current careers, which I think is important to note. So in this light, we hope that you find this really interesting and that you enjoy what we've got to say. Right, embarrassing photo time. So by way of introduction, I've spent the last 30 plus years working in the field of education across several schools, across 3 countries, several universities, and working in different capacities. Rather unbelievably now, I've actually trained into the thousands of trainee teachers. When I added it up recently, I thought, wow, I've been busy. Over the last 20 years, as Steph was saying. So I think I want to start by telling you something about my identity as a teacher. I remain really strongly rooted in my teaching lifeblood. I consider myself to be an ex-Schools History Project inspired teacher. Where's Helen Snelson? What I like to, my history teaching tribe is still my tribe, if you like, as a teacher. First and foremost, I'll always identify as a history teacher at heart. But nowadays, I'm very lucky to dwell within another community of practice, which is that of the international tribe of brilliant teacher educators that exist in this world, across subjects and phases, and I'm very proud to be part of that. Central to my work in education is a sort of deep-seated motivation to ensure that whoever I'm teaching, whatever learners I'm working with, I strive to help them to reach their absolute best, and that's my sort of prime work as a teacher and an educator. So thereby, sort of as a consequence, making a difference to their lives as they go out into the world. I think as teachers, those of us who educate, and I use that term deliberately, hold a very strongly driven core identity around that, to constantly find ways to learn, to help learners succeed, whatever the age or stage that we're teaching. For me, the subject and the age phase might have changed over time, but the success of others is always that biggest motivator for my approach in education. There's a lot of teachers in this room this evening who I think probably can identify with that. In this sort of era that we're living in of sort of self-interest and self-promotion, I think it's quite important that we have teachers who are uncommonly principled in this way. So I come to this address as a professor of teacher and learning, as does my wonderful colleague Jill. We're not professors of research. So what this means is that what I have to offer this evening comes to you as an educator for this university and for my region's schools and for our early career teachers who are out there doing the job on the chalk face. What I have to share contains wisdom and insight from a much more what I call frenetic vantage point. What do I mean by that? It means wisdom in action. It's Aristotle's term, really, and many others have explored it since. But that wisdom in action is what lies at the heart of what it is to be a good teacher in the classroom, or a lecture hall, or a seminar, or a public lecture. So I want this address's main messages to encourage our university's lecturers, our professional services staff, and indeed our Vice-Chancellor and senior management team to continually revisit one of the main core purposes of a university, and that is for its students, to educate them at the highest quality level so we get a set of graduates who go out into the world, regardless of discipline, and make a real difference in the field they choose to go into. Coincidentally, this is also what lies at the pedagogic heart of most teachers and any teacher in a school that you'll speak to. On a daily basis, it drives what is their quintessential being in action. So as you can see from the embarrassing pictures here, despite the ageing process and the now very white hair, I have striven to remain that kind of teacher through my career. So I'd like to thank my fellow University of York colleagues who teach UG and PG students, and I'd like to think that they would continue to adopt a similar drive for their work with the graduates. So let's move on. Pot noodle time, everybody. In this address, I'm going to share with you what 30 years in education profession has taught me about the qualities of a good teacher. That's what we're going to look at in the main. But also about the qualities of a good teacher-educator, which is what Steph was alluding to, which is what we all do here for our PGC students. This is just as important. That key teacher-educator is the key, indeed the essential mentoring influence on an early teacher's thinking. And teacher educators are the people who behind the scenes are quietly preparing the nation's teachers so that our children have important learning that's undertaken in a good way. So I'm, as Steph was alluding to, and I won't go into this into too much detail, but we are in a very challenging time for that in this country at the moment. It is well known amongst friends and colleagues present here this evening that in the last 5 years I've been quite vocal and continually arguing about the relatively new, incredibly generic and one-size-fits-all golden thread, that is what it's called, approach to educating our teachers, especially now in things like the mandatory core content framework, the early career framework, and the subsequent associated CPD for teachers. These kinds of things guarantee some kind of bottom line equal entitlement for all teachers and for early career novice teachers, but it's stifling, in my view, the natural creative development of our good teachers as well. I see these things as a bit like snakes and ladders. There's only one way up and there's only one way down. You can't do much else with that kind of game. It's linear in nature, it's subject to the same pitfalls. To coin another topical game at the moment, I think what we need to be thinking about is quality teacher CPD that's more like a game of chess for our teachers, where there's considerably more moves possible. And it depends on the context as to whether or not you would take those moves. Since 2021, what Steph alluded to, the DFE reaccreditation of ITT changes. It's hugely affected absolutely brilliant teacher education programmes up and down the country. It's still doing so. But for today, I'm going to leave this so-called golden thread debate, or as my colleague Jan Rowe calls it, golden pot noodle. I'm going to leave that for another time. And I expect some colleagues in the room, and probably most of my closest family, are very happy to hear that. So let's look at what makes a good teacher, shall we? The characteristics of a good teacher. Like many other ITE courses around the country, when we interview our prospective teachers at the University of York, one task we ask them to do is to rank order what they perceive to be the most important qualities of a teacher. We use something called a Diamond 9 approach. Some of you in the room will know what that is, but essentially it's about ranking from least to most important a set of characteristics or a set of things that they can see. So they do this in a group, and we get that to do them in a group deliberately so that the candidates can start to understand that working as a teacher is never an isolated role. You are always working in teams, relying on others' expertise and others' respective experience to make the best decisions. So the aim is always to register with the candidates at that point in time, before they even start training, a clear message that to teach the best lessons and to get the best learner outcomes, it's critical to productively work with others. So we're going to have a bit of fun now. Just have a little look at these. These are the things that there's a couple of extra ones on here, which Jill and I added when we were talking about what we were going to do. So we're going to involve some audience participation, please. Please take out your phone. And what I'd like you to do is, those are the things that we're going to look at, but they're all listed here as well. I'd like you to either go to Mentimeter and put that code in that's at the top there, 1851, 1976, or you can use the QR code that's listed there. And with your immediate neighbours, with the list that's in front of you, which is these things, what I'd like you to do is choose your top 3 and just list those, just the top 3. We could do all 12, but it would take us all night. So please just take your top 3 and perhaps talk to your neighbour about why you've chose those. Add those to the Mentimeter survey. So I'm not going to give you long to do this. This is good time management, as a teacher always does. You have 2 minutes. It starts now. Okay, I'm going to bring you to a close. That stays open, so if you want to carry on thinking about it, you can do, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. We'll keep it open for the duration of the address, so you can have a look at it. And if you've not managed to get into it, you can still, talk amongst yourselves about it. As I go through this address, keep those top 3 that you've just talked about in mind, and see if these are still your top 3 at the end. Okay. When our PGCE interview candidates undertake this ranking task, they could kind of immediately discover that we've played a bit of a trick on them, haven't we? Because all these characteristics that are on the cards that they have in front of them, they're the teacher's arsenal, aren't they? They're the things that make the great teacher. And some of these Jill will be picking up on in her talk a little bit later. So these nascent teachers, as they develop into teachers for the first time, it's critical that they craft and hone each of these things to become a really effective teacher, and to be able to teach learners of all abilities and all age types. So that's where we start them off. But I'm going to take you back now to 1909. I'm a historian, this is why. Over a decade ago, at the end of their training year, and knowing how much time I spend in the history section of a second-hand bookstore, my then cohort of PGC students bought me this book. It's called Practical School Method. It's published at the turn of the 20th century by somebody called J.H. Boardman, B.A. London. And somebody called Bertha C. Thomas, who you'll see there, bought this book, and presumably to learn how to become a really good teacher herself. It is packed full of fascinating gems about how to teach and how to teach different subjects, many of which still hold true. For example, in the history section, the reader is prompted to learn the common faults in teaching history, such as the abuse of memory work by causing scholars to learn lists of dates and events without showing the connection between them, or laying too much stress upon wars and battles, and neglecting to give an adequate account of the habits, customs, and social position of the people at the time. It's also got some really interesting little gems in it. So at the start of the book, these are just some quotes from the book, there's loads of others, but at the start of the book, Mr. Boorman reminds the reader that it's the high function of the teacher to prepare his pupils to become good citizens, to create or foster in them an attitude for work and intelligent use of leisure, etc. But he also talks about, and this is really interesting, the total amount of time that pupils should have in school. If you get away from the fact that it says he all the way through it, which is a bit annoying for those of us in the 21st century, but anyway, what is most interesting is the last bit. The home and the school should be mutually helpful. 1909. So despite these sort of external nuggets of pedagogic wisdom that are in there, there is very little recognition in the book, interestingly, of the teacher's own identity, the quality of the teacher, and the expertise a teacher might hold. There's no recognition of that at all. One place where it is possible to identify some recognition of the teacher's identity is in the preface. So that little quote there about putting into practice the principles here laid down, because they're the ones you should use. The young teacher may not only obtain an intelligent theoretical knowledge of the work, but being able to combine the highest mental training with the best instruction. Interesting, because that sort of tallies with some of what we're seeing in that core content framework today. The other thing is that it says the chief aim is to lead the teacher to think about their work, sadly missing from the CCF now, and so on. So it is a really interesting little glimpse into what a early 20th century teacher might be doing. Essentially, what it says is that they needed to be able to follow a method, they had to put set principles into practice, they had to have some kind of intelligent theoretical knowledge, and they had to engage in the highest level of mental training, which thankfully still involved thinking about their work at that time. Perhaps more significantly, the early 20th century teacher also needed to engage in practical classroom teaching. Phew, thank goodness for that. Otherwise that would have been not good. So, why have I shown you this, and why is this book from all that time ago quite important? Well, in this address, nearly 120 years later, what I'm going to do is consider what I think the good qualities of a teacher are, but I'm going to do it at these three levels, slightly differently. I'm going to look at expertise, I'm going to look at identity, and I'm going to look at quality of teaching. Because for me, these are the things that I think are the essence of a teacher's professionalism. And actually, the other important aspect to this is that these things lie at the heart of what it means to be ethically professional in what we do in our teaching. So I'll then go on to have a little bit of consideration about what teacher education pedagogy has told us about this, and theory and thinking from outside our particularly restrictive English system. And I'll also just give a little sense of the fact that there are alternative ways of doing teacher education. They do already exist that are different to our own rather restricted system. So I'll end by just showing you some of the characteristics of the teachers that I've been educated by that allow us to take what I call pedagogic breaths. Again, sadly missing in what we do at the moment. So to help you with this, we're going to start by watching a little video. Sorry if you've seen this. Go back to your 3 words. As you're watching this, what I want you to do, please, is just see if you can see expertise, any sense of a teacher's identity, any quality, any characteristics of a good teacher that the DFE wants us to have teachers doing, or any myths or stereotypes. So.
Nice trim, mate. Very good. Sit down. 10B, here's what's happening today. So, what's in the periodic table?
Elements.
Elements, right, good. Can everybody give me an example of an element? Nice one, lifesaver. Cheers, mate. Well, that's the kind of thing that we're looking at doing.
I just don't get it.
Okay, pens down. Let's try this a different way. Move your shoulders, more energy, and you're getting further apart into a liquid. Very good. Stop. Good. Look as if they what was happening. Ollie, what's going on, mate? What do you feel? Whoa. Okay. If you need anything, come see me. Okay, break time's over.
Is it all time now?
So, you're 11. 4 weeks until your exams. And I want you to do as well as a know you can. It stops right now. So what does that mean?
I don't know, sir.
You put down what you think.
I've got for the unit meters per second.
That's brilliant. I would not have thought about doing it that way. Well done. Have you done your homework? Do you any other questions? Come on, you've got your hand up. Hey, listen. Come on, lads. Does that change whether you're for or against?
Yeah.
So what makes this good? Come on, look a bit closer. You can't see the gases because they're sort of pushing at the lid.
Jesus.
More energy, more energy, more energy. Really good, buddy, that. We'll be teaching everybody else soon. Okay, is that any better?
Nice one, sir. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. Search Get Into Teaching.
So, why have I just shown you this? Well, that's what the DFE thinks the good teacher should look like. And it's interesting because that's what's meant to be attracting people into the profession. We've also got these things, teacher standards. Can't read them here. I'm glad you can't because they're quite quite depressing, really, in lots of ways. But we have these standards, and every government has a different version of those standards that they want us to teach teachers to be able to do. These ones currently are 12 years old, a little out of date for what our 21st century 2020s needs. So I'd like to think about it differently. I'd like to think about this in terms of expertise, identity, and quality teaching. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to introduce you to some teachers and educators that I have either worked with or been taught by during my life, just to give some examples of how this can work. So we're going to move on now away from the DFE version of what makes a good teacher and go to mine. These are two people who had time in my life. I'm going to talk to you about them in terms of expertise. Okay? In their recent book, Gerard and Holloway define expertise in education as a deeply contested and very dangerously constructed term. It's always subject to public critique, it's always subject to debate. They wisely identify that to use the terms expertise and experts in relation to teachers does something. They say it shapes how we understand the work of teachers, their relationship to their students and their community, and the role of teachers in society. So let's briefly explore now how expertise can manifest itself through exemplar teachers and an exemplar teacher educator. One of the most formative teachers in my life was this person on the left, my A-level English teacher, Maureen Smith. In the context of my schooling career back in the mid-80s and mid to late 80s, Maureen sat as head of English. She was the school's expert teacher on the poetry of Edward Thomas and Tennyson, and on all the plays of Shakespeare. But she was also the teacher who was most likely to pierce any sense of pompous arrogance that any sixth form A-level English teacher might tend to have of themselves. Sitting in classrooms with Miss Smith meant that you always had to be on your toes. The expectation being that you would have thoroughly read a designated chapter or poem or play scene, and that you were willing to debate and discuss that alongside others to get at the joy and the openness of looking at the world through an author or a poet or a playwright's vantage point. So as a teacher, Maureen was always completely prepared, always on top of what targets you needed to work on as you grew in your understanding, and ultimately extraordinarily well read across all genres. She epitomised the idea of expertise with subject knowledge that just flabbergasted us as sixth formers, as you can imagine. You instantly realised as a student of Maureen's that reading literature was dynamic, ever-changing interpretations were always available, and that but that also had to be simultaneously based in deep, detailed understanding of a literary work. So only then was class debate possible in her classes. Expertise was fundamental to her core of being as a teacher. and that she wanted us to aspire to. Years later, I'd visit Maureen when I was a practicing teacher myself to continue to learn from her. And when she passed away, I inherited the very Edward Thomas book that she'd used with us at A-level, complete with all its detailed expert notes of what it was that she had manifested as an expert teacher with us in our A-level lessons. So a real role model for me in terms of expertise. Cut forward to 2003, I commenced my PhD studies in Alberta, Canada, and I was under the watchful eye of my supervisor, Margaret Hunsberger. Margaret was Deputy Dean, Language Arts Specialist, researcher, but also a PhD supervisor of renown in the department that I was in. Expertise from Margaret came through a thoroughness of understanding the whole field of curriculum studies. This saw myself and my fellow PhD colleague undertaking a doctoral level year-long course in the fundamentals of curriculum studies. And every week the two of us were given a chapter in the ERA Handbook of Curriculum Studies, or the tome as we like to call it, to read, followed by intensive scrutiny and questioning in a two-person face-to-face exacting seminar with Margaret every week. This supposedly prepared us for our PhD candidacy exams. It was one of the most intense learning experiences of my life and my educational career, and I literally feared I would never be well enough prepared for those sessions. But the significant aspect of expertise that we saw in Margaret in those sessions was her unfailing ability to see curriculum as something that is constructed by communities for communities. As I brought to bear this very British sense of what curriculum is onto what we were talking about in our discussions, I also learned to understand that teachers work under whatever each unique society wants it to be and wants education to be. What's the curriculum canon, what the local hierarchy of knowledge is, and that kind of thing. I soon realised that expertise relates to the way a teacher continually engages with their dialogue of what's happening in their world and what's happening in the specific context of their pupils. So society frames its curricula and expects its teachers to pin flags to those particular curriculum masts. So these two case studies have given me a very good idea to develop an understanding of what expertise and what being expert could demand. You've got to stay updated in your discipline, you've got to place expert knowledge at the centre of what you do, you've got to have a teacher or a teacher educator that challenges the position of curricula in society and in the political arena, and that teachers and teacher educators can counteract where sort of the datification of education sort of neutralises the expertise that people have. So those two presented really good examples for me as I thought about my career of what expertise could look like. So I'm going to move on now to identity. Two more people for you to meet. Defining teacher identity could probably take an entire lifetime, and there's certainly a plethora of literature on teacher identity which would suggest that this is the case. It generally revolves around debates on the nature of practice, the role and extent of collaboration and partnership between teachers that forms their identity, continued theme of tensions within a contested identity territory. Throughout our educational lives, all of us have directly encountered teacher identities that we like and that we ally with, and then teacher identities that we find a lot more challenging. You can think of those teachers that you've had and those educators you've had. But it is the one aspect of training, in my view, in this country that we neglect to explore in enough depth with our nascent teachers, in my view, to the detriment of their career development. Up against clashing external policy challenges that demand enactment at a local level, teachers constantly have to negotiate a middle ground where their own personally held beliefs about what's right for a class or a set of individuals that they are teaching and their own lived experience as teachers seems to clash against a sort of accountability agenda that's going on in this country. So it's really important that we think about professional identity. Looking back, I don't think that my own training as a teacher in the early 90s left me with a sense of my teacher identity. I wasn't clear on what I believed were the underpinning tenets of my teaching practice. I don't think I left knowing that. But I did meet these role models in my life who helped me with that sense of who I was as a teacher. First of these was Dave Jackson. This was my history teacher when I was at school. He was a proud Oxbridge-educated historian, and he identified first and foremost as a passionate advocate for the discipline of history. And in his history department, as a pupil, I was lucky enough in the mid-80s to experience firsthand his early pedagogic approaches, which were very different and were around that sponsored schools history project. So we'd do things like we'd wonder over the identity of the Sutton Hoo warrior at a local level, or we'd debate the Arab-Israeli conflict, interestingly, back then, at modern world level. Or we'd realise that history could consist of studying a development through time, medicine through time, for example, from prehistoric times to the present day. Or we could study a period in depth, so we could learn about a short period of time, like the short period of time of 50 plus years where the American West was taken over. At A level, I started to learn about the history of history, the historiography, the methodology that underpins the discipline of history. And at the same time, I was allowed to undertake my own historical inquiry, looking into the, at the time, the fatal underground battles of local lead miners in Derbyshire that were going on in the 1830s against competing international lead prices. I can still remember sitting in Sheffield Records office, age 17, looking at records of how much lead had or had not come out of that mine in the 1820s and 1830s. So history came alive because I had a teacher there whose overt identity as a historian was rubbing off on me as a pupil. So what I came to realise years later as a history teacher is that actually he was really bucking the trend of history teaching at that time. He'd adopted an approach to history as an early engager that most schools did not take. And then later on in my life, in my first teaching post, which happened to be in that department with him as my boss, it was the very same history department. I embraced that identity as well, and I took what I learnt from him into the innovative approaches that I then took on myself with my work with the Historical Association and Schools History Project over the years that followed. So a very important identity there. Second person, Joe Towers, very different. Second example takes me back to Canada. Without understanding the complexities many centuries later of the Wars of the Roses and the impact of that, my supervisor, Margaret, put me and dared to place me with a Lancastrian academic on my supervisory committee, Dr. Joe Towers. Once we'd got over that obvious Yorkshire-Lancashire stumbling block, I then undertook an initial doctoral course in educational learning theory with Joe. I was a teacher educator by then, and what she did was she challenged my very fixed ideas about maths education. She was a mathematician by background. She identifies as a mathematician first and foremost, and an extraordinary scholar of maths education. Her identity is grounded in that. Her work at the time I was in Canada was really considering how learners of maths collectively battle with the same challenges of working out a solution to a maths problems as the players of instruments in a jazz band when they try and work off each other, which was really interesting. In fact, all of her research is completely on the phenomenon of individual and collective mathematical understanding, and specifically on what a teacher does to allow such understanding to happen. So incredibly important influence on me in terms of her identity that she held. Her understanding of pupils' emotional relationships with maths and cultures of maths learning in Canadian classrooms helped me to then think about the exploration of history teacher identities that I then went on to look at in my own PhD. So in these case studies, we've got teacher identity working at 3 levels basically. Identity is deeply personal, it's ever-changing, and it's collaborative as a venture. That's what I learned from these people. Moving on. Quality. I'm going to talk about quality now very quickly. This is very difficult to talk about quickly, but I want to visit in this address the issue of quality. It's a really interesting word at the minute. There's lots of words being bandied about in this country about quality of teaching at the minute. Things like world class, world leading, golden thread again, just to name a few. At this point in time, it does feel like in our system of education, the main drivers of quality in teaching revolve around comparisons with international trend data, national policy initiatives to make teaching better, vested interests defining what apparently quality looks like in terms of policies that are centred solely on academic outcome. So whether we look at teaching or teacher education, that final theme of quality is riddled in controversy. So to keep this really manageable, because we're not going to solve those controversies tonight, I'm going to pull on this model. And this model comes from somebody called Claire Brooks, who now works at Cambridge, has just moved from UCL. It's really good. This is a model that she developed after considerable empirical data had been collected across many years in many different countries about teacher education systems. And it's a model which she verified with her participants. Unsurprisingly, as a geographer, which is her background, she calls her 3 domains, which are listed here, spatial, knowledges, and she talks a lot about spatial knowledge domains, which I think is really interesting. So the site of teaching or teacher education that she was researching becomes really important. She also suggests that all of these things are bi-directional, which I think is really important. So I'm going to look at this model in relation to the two people I now want to talk to you about. First one is this person, Christine Council. She's an internationally recognised curriculum expert thinker. All of us in the room probably know about her. I met her in 1995 when I worked with this motley crew in Bristol at a school, a brand new school. It had no curriculum at all. We had nothing. It was a blank piece of paper. Under her faculty leadership, she was in charge of what we fondly called the SS, or the Social Sciences faculty. We had such incredible CPD because meetings were never about busyness or business. They were always about becoming better teachers. And because of this approach to her curriculum and developing curriculum in a new school, I learned how to become a thinking practitioner who always thought about history education in terms of its fundamental roots and underpinning concepts. I literally changed the way I taught from working with her, and she really helped me understand what quality curriculum looks like in a school. Christine went on to become Cambridge's PGC history tutor, and she for many years transferred that same quality approach into working with generations of nascent history teachers who are still working in the profession. So she is a curriculum guru in the history teaching world. But what she's got is that kind of idea of situated knowledge that Brooks talks about. She has the idea of adaptive expertise because she works across stakeholders, not just with universities, not just with schools. She works across MATs, she works with government units and so on and so forth. She's a trusted expert teacher and curriculum developer across all political divides, and that's no easy task in England today. So really important influence on me. The final group that I want to talk about are this crew down the bottom, who some of you might recognise. There are some of them at the back of the room. The number one aim of this particular group of people, who are the University of York's PGC team, is to create a subject specialist, pedagogically informed, critically reflective practitioner who leave us from their training with a toolbox of approaches so they can educate their youngsters brilliantly. It's not dissimilar to Brooks' model of teacher education practice. It encapsulates that capacity to address change. We give them that skill set, the ability to adapt their teacher expertise and the disposition to situate their teacher knowledge. So there we have two examples of people who are showing incredible, talented, quality education. So moving on very quickly because we've not got much time left. This is ridiculous picture really, but I just want to point to the fact that there are scholars out there who are doing amazing work on what dispositions are needed to become the critical teacher. And one of those is Dorr, who in 2014 came up with these particular dispositions that a teacher needs to have. A reflexive disposition, where a teacher is aware of their own pedagogy and has a desire to keep developing it. A critical disposition, where a teacher takes issues of social justice and equality seriously. And then a creative disposition where they use their experience, they use their knowledge and their sensitivity to think through learning and curriculum in new ways. I think that leads to flourishing educational practice, and I would hope that we would create teachers in that vein from this university. I'm just going to show you some things very quickly here that I've been working on recently. Recent research that I've done with these colleagues from Manchester and UCL. We have been looking at how the ECF, the Early Career Framework, has affected mentors in our particular necks of the wood, basically. And we've been trying to see whether the professional educators are able to use their lived experience to educate young teachers. So I'm not going to go into detail on this, but I'm just going to show you some of the themes that have come through some of the data that we've got. One thing that they're feeling is that they're being told what the authorised content knowledge is that they must teach. That's a real frustration, and it comes through massively in these themes that we've looked at. The other thing is that they're being told how to mentor, and the training methods that they are being given prescribes the way they must work with these young teachers, rather than thinking about what that young teacher needs in the moment as they are learning their craft. The final theme that we've been looking at is the fact that they are complying, but they're also trying to mediate what's happening. You can see there Wendy says we're ticking the boxes, but actually we do what we need to do when we need to do it for her. So what we've got there is, this is what the model looks like at the minute for young teachers in this country. Authorised content, authorised mentoring approaches, specific presentation, of mentor professionalism. But what we've got going on with our mentors who are working with these early career teachers is a bit of these things. So I'm going to go back to that word frenetic. They're doing what is needed in the moment with the wisdom they've got at that point in time. But the compliant mentor professionalism is what they're having to do to be with these ECFs. And they're meeting somewhere in the middle. That's what's happening in reality right now. And it is quite frustrating for those mentors who are trying to create great teachers. The last things that I'm going to talk about to you today, very quickly, because I can see Vanita's looking at me. There are other ways of doing this. Here is one. This is the program that I used to work on in Canada. It is a much more open program. It is based, this particular part of the teacher education program at the University of Calgary requires teacher trainees to go and do a semester either abroad or working with First Nations people or working in a different part of Canada. And so it allows those people to become reflexive and critical practitioners in a different context. It is possible to do this differently and not in the restrictive way we do it in this country. Second example, really quickly. It's not all bad in the UK. Here's an example from the UK, and I know that other subject associations are doing similar things. This is really important, this work. This is an example of a programme which is not the ECF, but actually gives the history teachers, the young history teachers, and actually more experienced ones, or teachers who've come to teach history without knowing that they were going to be doing so, a way of learning about their subject and embracing the subject of history in a really meaningful way in their careers. Much richer than the generic stuff that I was showing you earlier. So, going to end now with a few just things here. What makes that teacher the most creative pedagogic expert that we want? For me, it's these three things. So they've got your three-legged stool there. Quality. People have got to be given pedagogic breadth to find the quality that works for the context that they are in. Identity. Educators in all age phases, they need to be given the permission to nurture their own identity as a teacher. And then expertise. So harnessing the academic potential that they've got to allow them to soar in their subject specialism. These are the things I think that would make a richer and better teacher. So, shall we have a quick look at your version and see what you came up with? Let's have a look at what you came up with. So we had good communicator as the top one, and then we had strong subject knowledge as the second one, and enthusiastic and dedicated as the third. So that was the top three. There were 12 to choose from, and you can see where the other ones came in. That was your version that you came up with tonight. So just very quickly, just a few thank yous from me. These are the places that significantly have impacted on me as an educator through life. Very important places. Kenya being one of those. A lot of these people are around just behind family, and thankfully Jan's got here from Ofsted. That's good news. So we've got my family here. All these friends in different parts and next to the woods of the world have all had an impact on the way that I teach and the way that I think about education. And then finally, my wonderful colleagues in my department. Couldn't find a picture of all of us now. There's a lot more of us now than there is in that picture, but I thought it would be interesting. So thank you very much. There's a few references there if anybody's interested, but thank you for listening.
I know there's going to be thanks a little bit later on from Vanita as well. I just want to say massive thanks for sharing your inspirational story and also what's formed you and drawing on those lived experiences and doing that. We've got about 5 minutes for questions now, so if you want to take a seat, and we're going to have a bit of a Q&A. Stuart.
No pressure.
No pressure.
I'm interested in the very human nature of what you talk about when you talk about identity, and I wondered what you thought AI and the pressure that there will be to develop AI will have on the sort of things that you're talking about. Will it release teachers or will it constrain them?
I think that's a really interesting question. Thank you, Stuart. AI has the potential to be a real freeing tool for teachers. It could relieve workload, but it's also going to present all sorts of challenges as well when we come to how exams are going to change and so on and so forth. It could go one of two ways. I think we're in very early days. We'll have to see. I think in terms of releasing time for trainees, it's got the potential to do a lot of good. Whilst a trainee does need to learn, for example, how to plan a lesson and how to deliver a lesson, they're already feeling pressure in terms of the timetable that's coming with the changes that are coming for 24, 25. So I would say it's got potential. We'll see what happens on that front.
Thank you very much, Claire. Really thought-provoking. I wonder, to what extent do you think there are grounds for optimism in the way teaching and teacher education are conceptualised by government and inspectorate in this country?
Well, I think this is a really good question, but I think and we've been talking a lot about this in the last 2 days at USEC conference, we've got to take back ownership of what's happening here. So we've had a period of time in the last 3 to 4 years where a version of teaching has been placed upon us, but it is up to us to show that actually we are educating teachers, we're not training them. And there's the difference. So in terms of optimism, I think there is a will in the sector now to move beyond this compliance version of teacher training and get into something which allows a teacher to get at quality, identity, etc. Yeah.
Thank you. So my wife's a teacher, as are many of my friends, and I guess they've been teaching for probably like 10 plus years. A lot of them are looking to leave,
of course.
Under significant stress. I was wondering what role, if any, and I'm thinking in kind of the context of York for Life, excuse me, should a university play in not just educating teachers, but ensuring that those teachers that you do educate are retained and feel confident in their career? Do you think that is a role that universities should play?
Yes, I do. It's a very easy answer, really. Yes, I do. I think we do have a responsibility. But it for me, and from my perspective and my experience, it comes from what we do for teachers, for example, at secondary level, in subject. So, why do secondary teachers go into becoming a secondary teacher of a subject? It's because they've got a passion about that subject that they once did at degree level. So what we need to be doing is offering them CPD that isn't sort of teacher specific necessarily, but actually gets them back into that love and that passion of the subject that they chose to teach. So they feel that they're at the cutting edge. They feel they can excitingly bring that back into the classroom. That would help. There's we could talk all night about what we need to do about the retention problem in this country, but I think that's a role that a university could usefully play. Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? And I realise I've got a microphone, so I'll just have to yell a little bit. Obviously, by the time students get to us, they've been through primary school, secondary school, FE college or sixth form colleges. What should we be doing more to work as a community of educators as well? And I'm thinking, York, we're quite collegiate generally, but what can we do to help support those teachers, following on from what Gary said, but taking it around, what can we learn from what goes on in schools as well?
A lot.
And how do we do it?
Absolutely. I think one thing that frustrates teachers at secondary level anyway is that they obviously have to get students ready to undertake public exams, which aren't particularly useful for when they get to university. So when they get into first year, they're then suddenly being asked to perhaps approach their discipline in a completely different way or with completely different assessment routes. So one useful thing that could be done from a university perspective is perhaps bringing together those teachers who are teaching at that high level to be working alongside academics in our different departments so they understand that. Some of my team already do this work. They go into those host departments and are working with them. I know, Helen, for example, you're doing a lot of work with the history department on that. But there's not so what we hear with first year teachers is, they never teach them anything right at A level. And then what we hear at A level is, we can't do that because we've got to do this. But actually, if we brought them into the room, there are experts in pedagogy there who could be working with experts in academic disciplines. So yeah, I think that would be a way forward.
Thank you for that. Lots of food for thought going forward. Another round of applause for Claire again, just to say thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Yes, good evening everyone. If you don't know me, I am Professor Stuart Bell. I'm a professor in the law school, and as Tracy said, I was the Dean of Faculty for some time, and that's where I worked with Jill as an Associate Dean. So when Jill first asked me to introduce her tonight, a great privilege and honour obviously, she had one stipulation. I sort of talked to her about what she wanted me to talk about, obviously. I talked to her about, would you like me to introduce your history? No. Would you like me to talk about your values? No. She had one stipulation, and that was I had to be funny. Now, anyone who's ever been told, go on, be funny, knows that any direction just to be funny is the kiss of death for any chance of any spontaneity or actually being funny. But it didn't seem like the right time or place to tell Jill that. If you know Jill well,
You know that when Jill tells you to do something, you do it. And it had better be good. So I was in a bit of a panic. I started to try to recall some of the amusing anecdotes from over our years working together at the university. And there were lots of them, but I was struggling to find any that weren't potentially libelous or would require a sort of 20-minute setup, which I don't have the time. And then suddenly it hit me. Now, for those of you who don't know, Jill's specialism is related to accounting and finance. And in my role as Dean, I had the privilege, and I use that word advisedly, of sitting in on what my sons would term a shed load of interviews for academic accounting and finance roles. And there were interview after interview with bright, erudite finance and accounting academics presenting on all matters of accountancy and financy type things for hour after hour, day after day, week after week, month after month. And in all honesty, it sort of blurs into a sort of long chain after a while. Now, surely, in all those interviews, I would uncover at least a comedic gem or two. So I racked my brain and I reflected on those endless sessions. And again, I use the word endless advisedly. And after many hours of reflection and research, I can tell you that I came to a very firm conclusion, which can be very simply expressed. There's absolutely nothing whatsoever that is remotely funny in any shape or form about accounting and finance. Nothing at all. So I'm sorry, Jill, I tried, honestly. Now, in all seriousness, it's a distinct honour to introduce Professor Jill Webb, one of our university's newest and most dedicated professors. While Jill's path here, as she will probably tell you about, has been anything but boring or linear, one constant has shone through. That's her deep commitment to inclusive, innovative education, as Tracy said. Now, this dedication took root in Jill's own experience as a first-generation university student, and it now manifests through everything from her scholarship on social inequalities in higher education and promoting student belonging in large, diverse student cohorts to her student-centred course design and the countless hours she's dedicated to advancing faculty and institutional initiatives for diversity, inclusion and pedagogical excellence. In my years working with Jill, I've seen how this drives and permeates through all that she does. Now, I can't remember when I first met Jill. It's a little bit like the Easter Island statues. I sort of have an almost timeless awareness of her being a champion for all sorts of learning and teaching issues in the institution, doing all of those thankless but essential things that are an unseen part of a university like this one, such as serving on countless university committees and groups dedicated to advancing pedagogy and the student experience. Now, anyone who has sat through these sorts of meetings, and they do compete with a number of finance and accounting interviews in that mental notebook of mine, knows that you don't do those sorts of things on a whim. You return to it again and again because you are driven to want to make a difference, and that's part of the package. Now, in this way, Jill embodies our university's core values of inclusion, diversity and excellence. And that, of course, is to be applauded. But much, much more than that for me personally is that she's a wonderful colleague to work with. She's thoughtful, she's supportive in the most difficult times, but at the same time, she's quite prepared to challenge the occasional, or maybe quite regular, absurdity of life in the modern university. She's pragmatic and endlessly constructive, working through the sometimes frustrating minutiae of the world of rules-based quality assurance with a gimlet-eyed persistence. She's serious about what she does, but that doesn't stop her having a laugh while she's doing it. To me, she's definitely an exception to the general, there's nothing that is fun or funny about accounting and finance. But that's enough from me. I want to make sure that she has ample time and for you to hear from her yourselves. Please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Jill Webb.
Hello. I feel like I'm either dead or on This Is Your Life. It's one of the two, anyway. So I'm going to talk to you about navigating chaos, personal and sectoral, and creating a meaningful identity, harkening back to Claire's presentation in HE as a fish out of water. So I'm going to start with It's All About Me, and then I'm going to talk to you about what are really unique opportunity we have for impact as teachers across all sectors, but in the higher education sector is kind of where my experience is rooted. And then I'm going to draw on some of my previous expertise in business and some of the things that I've seen as a leader, and think about factors that are really important to, as an educator, leading to drive impact in education. And then I'm going to give you some examples of that. So when I was at school, I had a really clear sense of where I wanted to go. I was good at school. I was in the top sets at Brunner Comprehensive, and I really wanted to go to university as a first generation student. So I had a really clear vision. My teachers were massively supportive of me, massively supportive. They were role models for me. They gave me information about what university might look like. I was with a really small set of peers, because not many people from Brunner Comprehensive, as you can imagine, go to university. But that kind of peer support, that companionship support in it together thing made a big difference. My parents were really supportive, and as I've said, so were my teachers. Since that time, I've been plunged into what I can only describe as aspirational chaos. I went to LSE, as far away as from Billingham as I could get. And I'd studied economics at LSE, so that's what I did. And I kind of had just no clue of what life after LSE might look like. It kind of started and ended for me at getting to university. So if I thought about a businesswoman, I mean, those of you who are older will recognise Alexis from Dynasty there, then that was my kind of version of a businesswoman, which well, can you really see me in a large hat with a cigarette? And obviously I was in London, and a lot of people who I was with kind of aspired to go into finance, aspired to go into the city. I kind of knew it involved a lot of shouting and running around on the stock exchange, but I just really, really did not have a clue. One thing I was really, really clear about was that I didn't want to be an accountant. I became an accountant. So I worked within KPMG for 5 years. I did it because somebody dropped out and I was looking for a temp job after university. So it was a kind of fairly random choice. I was quite successful at KPMG. I was there for 5 years. I was promoted to manager when I was 24. But I was just never really feeling it. I liked working with my colleagues, but I couldn't identify with what we did as a firm. It didn't fit well with kind of my values. And when I looked at the partners, I couldn't see myself. I couldn't see myself in the future. There was nobody around that I kind of identified with. So I was very much a kind of fish out of water in that space, albeit a successful fish out of water. And I just wanted to be out. I wanted to escape. I wanted to escape into different water. Once again, no clue what I thought I might do. So I saw an advert actually for, as it was then, Leeds Metropolitan University for an accounting teacher at the teaching professional education and undergraduates and postgraduates. And I thought, oh, I'll have a go at that. So that was in 1995. If we think about sectoral changes, then can you just talk to the person next to you and think about the things that have been introduced in our sector, the things that have happened since 1995? Just see how many you can come up with. Big things that have happened. Right, this is your interactive bit. You have to be good students now. You have to play. So you can shout out, look, even though we're in a lecture. Give me some ideas what's happened in the sector since 1995, what big things have been introduced to have changed. Fees. Fees. Go on, you've got a point. What else happened?
RAE. Ref.
Ref, Oh, I'm not interested in that. It's got nothing to do with teaching. TEF. Yeah. Oh, good. You're coming up with more than me. Go on. Yeah, that kind of idea of modules. Overseas students, the NSS, 1995, the NSS was introduced. The OFS. Oh, you've come up with a lot more than me. So I kind of moved into a sector, I would say, beset by, about to be beset by huge changes. So Tro would talk about this as the move from mass to universal. And bearing in mind that I was in a new university teaching a vocational subject, some of these changes had a fundamental effect on that part of the sector. So for me, the things that had a big impact, introduction of the NSS, yes, definitely. The first kind of, not the first private universities, as Mr. Webb pointed out to me the other night. No, you're wrong about that. But the first for-profit organisations moving into the sector. Firstly, the University of Law, and then Stuart, and then BPP starting to offer accountancy degrees, so kind of strong private sector competition, expansion in international student numbers, introduction of fees, and the abolition of student number caps, which really led to a lot of competition. I would say over that period, kind of sitting with this theme of identity, the post-92s really kind of lost their identity. Before that, I would say the post-92s, or in my early career in post-92, we were very, very teaching focused. We took a huge pride in the quality of our teaching, and it was about high quality teaching and vocational education. Everybody in my department was an accountant and a kind of vocational educator. And the post-92s, I think, started to worry about the position and try to be kind of half traditional universities, getting much more interested in research. At the same time, I guess, with NSS and costs rising, the Russell Group, or the more traditional universities, opened up opportunities for teaching and scholarship. People like me didn't work in Russell Group institutions, for teaching and scholarship pathways. And I made the decision, I was very, very worried about the private sector, about degree apprenticeships, about what that was going to do to post-92s. And so I made a decision to move to York in 2012 on a TNS route. Kind of into really an organisation that didn't really know what TNS was, how that articulated with ART. We might say some things have changed, but really not many. So in terms of kind of like my own identity, I was kind of, left at sea as to, again, what does I like doing what I do, but what does a good role model looks like? Where am I going? Kind of back to my aspirational chaos. So what did I do? So this is what I did in order to kind of make sense of some of that and to think about kind of how I might navigate my way through my career without a sense of kind of success or anything to aspire to. So I thought about what's important to me, and it's very clear to me that I take a value-driven approach. And my students, or our students, are really important to me, and social justice and inclusion in that space across all types of students, international, first generation, all sorts of students. Authenticity, I can't even say it, I can do it, I am authentic, but I can't say it. Authenticity and honesty are very important to me, so that's a very important part of my values. What do I need? What do I need to succeed? I thought I really like being part of a team. And one of the things that I'm really pleased about, particularly as I've become Associate Dean, is I've just developed various kind of professional partnerships with people from across the university. So Jan, I've worked a lot with Gary and Jamie, and people who normally wouldn't get together to kind of co-create stuff or to think about teaching. So I feel like together we've kind of broken down some of those PSS academic boundaries, and I think that's been really powerful in terms of the things that we are delivering. And then I had to think about what I'm good at, not always good at thinking about what I'm good at, or maybe I am, I don't know. So I think I'm quite good at bringing people together. I'm told that I'm quite tenacious and that I don't stop until I get what I think we need. I'm really good at getting stuff done. I'm a lover of a list. Mr. Webb would say I'm too much of a lover of a list, but I'm quite organised. I really like getting stuff done. And I've learned that, you know, kind of bringing people together in different ways helps innovation and facilitating innovation. So kind of across all of kind of the things I've done in this experience and my reflection on myself and my experience as a first generation student has kind of shaped me as a leader in terms of, I suppose, my sense of why I'm standing here is because I'm a leader in education, really, or a leader of education in HE. So I think that we have a massive opportunity in HE, and this might sound really corny, and I've considered this opportunity so important that I looked at it as part of my doctoral thesis. So I think it's really important to remember that for a lot of students, we are a massive part of their shaping of identity at a really important part in their lives. Not for all students, but for a lot of students, that's really, really important. And I feel that knowledge and academic life is hugely important, but that it's really important to articulate to those students the relationship between what they are doing here and their broader personal development. I think that's really, and I don't like positioning that as employability because I think it's much, much bigger than that. I think it's part of your values, part of understanding who you are and that kind of evolving sense of identity. I think it's a massive privilege to be able to work with students in that way. So I think that's really important. And so, you know, for me, maybe it's important to kind of think of ourselves as educators, as people who are helping students create spaces for the shaping of their aspirations and personal identity, be that through powerful knowledge, opening up kind of reflective spaces, or articulating the relationship between the classroom and various aspects of the outside world. So I think that's the opportunity that we have, thinking about where we fit in a broader picture kind of over time, if you like. And then in terms of delivering that, there's kind of two aspects. So I think of HE as a very complex system, and I think it's really easy to focus on your bit of that system, and when you're trying to drive change, not thinking sufficiently about, from a student's perspective, how all the elements of that system come together to form an experience. And I guess some of this stuff, some of this thinking comes from like my private sector experience, I suppose, in terms of the customer experience, but I don't think about it like that. I'm thinking about experience in a much more fundamental way. So there's multiple factors working together. So I'm always thinking about, well, where are the synergies? What can I do to influence those multiple factors? Not what individual levers can I pull to focus in on individual bits, but how can I drive change by innovating in a kind of synergistic way, if you like. So that focus on the broader perspective and what's going on from a student's perspective. So working across academic and PSS boundaries within the department, thinking about students and their own interactions. And this is another area that I looked at as part of my my doctoral thesis. If you think about those individual interactions, then they're human interactions, and relationships are really important in that for me. So a little bit of theory. So I've got a room full of education specialists, but it was part of my thesis. I looked at components of social capital and the importance of social capital in helping people develop and change, helping people open up to new possibilities and avenues. A lot of the educational literature focuses on kind of the informational element of social capital. But talking to my students and on the basis of my own experience, the softer side, if you like, of social capital is so important. So I see it as a kind of social capital sandwich in terms of thinking about, emotional support, esteem support, companionship support, and that it isn't just enough to show people the opportunities or the ways in which they might change, but it's also important to build their confidence and to help them engage with those opportunities. So I think we've got a really we've got a really good opportunity, and I think thinking about the relational aspects of HE and thinking about the bigger picture might help us drive forward change in HE. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of where I've kind of applied this two-pronged approach, if you like. So this is the York Management School in 2013, and we were in the doldrums. We've been talking about NSS today, actually. Been in the doldrums with NSS, and with the team, which I was one of the people leading the team. We really kind of thought about what was going on with that NSS and made a massive impact on the scores. We were top in the Russell group. We were up at almost 95% satisfaction at one point. And the way that I thought about this was kind of, so that if I think about my kind of thinking about the bigger picture. So for me, the important things were thinking about delivery as a team, understanding that a student doesn't experience a module, a student experiences a university, and from an academic point, it's much more about the programme and the department than it is about individual modules. So I really wanted to create a kind of community of colleagues. So I introduced all sorts of different initiatives to create community among colleagues, to get colleagues talking about their teaching, to get colleagues to have confidence in one another's teaching, to break down kind of that isolated sense of an academic and I'm just doing my thing and I don't understand or care really about how it fits into a whole. Colleagues were really up for that. They were really appreciative of it. So we had module leader meetings and we talked about what each other did. We did some training together. I did a lot more kind of information dissemination. So, when you know things, you think everybody else knows, don't you? Do you know what I mean? Like if something's in your head and you think you understand it, you think everybody else understands it. So I did a lot of the kind of I was going to entitle this talk, It's Not Rocket Science, but It Really Matters. And Caroline told me not to. But it's not rocket science, is it? So there was lots of information dissemination and information sharing, and we introduced regular updates. And then also trying to leverage, recognising we're part of a university and kind of leveraging and using that central stuff that was there. In terms of the relational side, did a lot to try and strengthen kind of academic student relationships, personal supervisor guidance to get a really good experience in that space, thinking about pedagogy, active pedagogy, and just stupid things like creating spaces in the classroom for students to actually talk to each other and feel comfortable and confident to work with one another in a kind of, in a learning environment. And also, obviously, for me, that relationship between academic work and professional development. We did some really nice things around that, in that we created kind of slides which we disseminated to people across the people teaching, and we kind of created a pro forma where people would talk about, in this lecture I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get you to do it in this way, and this might relate to your future life in this way, or I'm drawing on this skill, so to try and kind of pull together those synergies. Second example I'm going to use is another SBS example, another thing we've been talking about today. So this is the postgraduate expansion in SBS. Read it and be humbled. It's terrifying. So we could see that we massively expanded student numbers at this point, and there was a real drop in performance, and our postgraduate students were really having a terrible terrible experience. And for us, you know, 9%, I mean, it might sound dreadfully high to you, but 9%, you know, doesn't necessarily sound that high, but, you know, we've got a lot of students, and I remember talking to Stuart and saying that's a lot of people going home without the degree that they were hoping for, you know, under a lot of pressure and feeling very sad. And I really didn't feel that it was right that we did nothing about that. And if you look at kind of how things have changed, the expansion's continued. The expansion was inevitable. That was a university drive that we were going to expand our international student numbers, and good things have come of that. And we've actually, this isn't where I want it to be, but given the significant expansion since, we've kind of held the line. And we've held the line for a number of reasons. And one of those reasons was the kind of creative possibility that DAX opened up for us. And there's lots of DAX people in the room. Thank you, DAX people. I'm really pleased to see them. So this was another partnership. This was kind of a really important conversation as part of it. It was Jill Bishop's interview. She came in and she said, at St John, we've embedded these skills support, and I thought, I've got a problem, and you have got a solution, Jill Bishop. So working with Victoria, who was already doing kind of a PSS, weren't you then, Victoria? So Jill and Victoria worked really closely together. I guess I brought them together in that space. And the departmental academic and communication skills provision was born. Education already had something similar, but it was very adjunct. In SBS, it's very tailored to discipline content, and it provides support across the whole year. So again, it's not focused on a particular area. It's not just thinking, well, I'm delivering English language support. It's speaking to the whole programme. It's bringing things together. It's looking at things from the student's perspective. And it's having a huge impact on colleagues, on the way colleagues teach within SBS, on colleagues' understanding of international students in SBS, because the DAX team are experts in this space, and that's what they live and breathe. So it's really enriching our discipline-specific provision and helping us deliver it in a way that helps our students. The way the DAX provision has been organised in SBS is really clever in that it's also another form of support for our students that are attached to programmes, which are, obviously we've got very big programmes, and it really strengthens tutor-student relationships, helps kind of build community in what is a very, very big school now, which is a very, very big cohort. So we need to go at it. And this is what I mean about, you need to go at it in different ways. And this is one important way. So DAX isn't the answer, but it's one of a range of answers that helps us support our students. It also does some absolutely brilliant things in terms of helping the students think about themselves. So it introduced the idea of critical reflexivity. Jill and Victoria used to have it all embedded in a module, but that's slightly changed since MODS and SEMS. It doesn't take a deficit approach to international students. It talks about building cross-cultural community. It talks about upskilling the UK students to work with the international students. I'm just so proud of Jill and Victoria and the DAX team that they've done that. But that was a created opportunity that came out of a problem. I'm going to tell you about, I am a doer. So this is a little wordle of some of the stuff I've done. So Tracy's talked about York Online. I'd say we took a similar approach to that, in that a very, very strong structure for the students and opening up spaces to build relationships. Some of the work that I'm most proud of has been with Jan in that inclusive education space, and we kind of, we do our own thing, but we kind of come together, don't we, in that space. So in the pandemic, students were really struggling with creating connections with each other, and so we created departmental community coordinators. I feel like I'm the queen of anachronisms or whatever, abbreviations, which were student partners, paid student partners, embedded in departments to support departments with building student-led departmental academic community. And that was quite a difficult thing to do, and Jess and Jan from the inclusive learning team took the brunt of that. And that's evolved, and I would say it's really shifted us forward institutionally in that student partnership space, and I'm really proud of that. That idea of working with paid student partners, because initially we just told every department, you're having a paid student partner, work with them. But again, there was, you know, I don't know what you'd call it really, assets created around that to make sure that departments knew how to work with those departments, and they were really strongly supported. The other things that I've tried to do, both externally and internally, and I guess everything that I've done both internally and externally, and I think this is really important to raise with external work, I just don't do things for the sake of it. So, you know, if I've written something, if I've written about skills, I've written about skills because I think it's really important for, you know, for us to articulate the relationship between the development of skills and what we do in higher education, which is so important. Or recently we've got involved in the optionality and assessment project because we really wanted to explore. We didn't know much about it, did we? But we wanted to explore that with people from across the sector. A couple of things that I'm really pleased with is in the School for Business and Society with Caroline, actually, we started the Centre for the Advanced Study of Management Education, which sounds really posh, but it's like just a space where teaching and scholarship staff and other staff who want to get involved in teaching can come together. Again, that principle of, you know, being supported by your community and also trying to be a bit clearer on what scholarship means or what it could mean for different educators. Externally, I've done a similar thing in that I've created a community of practice for Russell Group kind of leaders in inclusive education. Again, very informal space where people can come and try out ideas and be supported by their peers. I feel like this really is all about me. But just summarising, I'm giving these examples to try to highlight kind of what is important in terms of really thinking about the important role we play in our students' lives and trying to take a big picture approach to to addressing issues. And I'm going to sum up with Viktor Frankl, which is quite posh, isn't it? I read Man's Search for Meaning recently, and this is what Viktor says. So this. And I thought this is actually quite a good motto for me in terms of, you know, I've never really had my eyes on the prize apart from when I wanted to go to university, but kind of that understanding of myself, and I think that's important for our students as well, has kind of helped me have a really, really satisfying career and to support my colleagues and work with my colleagues to drive change. Then I have to do this soppy bit at the beginning, at the end. Right, so this is me and Tom when we were fresh-faced and in love, and this is what we looked at like when I'd finished my professorial application. Stuart looked something similar, actually. There was a lot of crying. This is Caroline and I. She is my best friend and my co-pilot, or maybe I'm her co-pilot. This is Caroline and I driving change. See what I did there? And this is Amber and Evie, my daughters, who, well, I won't say no more. They're very special. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm going to a few more questions, so thank you. Who wants to go first? You've scared them all now, Lindsay.
Oh no, what have I done?
I'm going to have one then. So out of all of that, you've said what you've been proud of. What has been the most challenging aspect of everything that you've done and why?
I guess to try to put myself in the shoes of people who aren't as interested in the students as I am. and that I realise that in order to affect change, then I need to recognise that I work in a Russell Group institution and that not everybody is as interested in that, but then equally that doesn't make them bad people, but I need to work to their agendas, but equally get the best out of them as a leader. And I think I did do some of that, or we did do some of that as kind of with some of those projects.
Karen. I just want to ask what you think is the, well, maybe not just one thing, but what can the institution do to better support teaching and scholarship staff? You've got Tracy there, you've got me here. What can we do?
Don't know. I guess be clearer, and the institution is doing some of this, be clearer about the promotions criteria. I guess, and I don't know what Claire would think of this, but there is something cultural that needs to change, and you guys might know more about how to change it than me. Does that make sense? Like, there's a way of being that I'm not part of, and that needs to be challenged.
I think we're trying to make good inroads into part of it though by actually what we're doing around the teach. So what a lot of the work that Jill's talked about and what Steve and Claire and Jan and others have done is really trying to put teaching at the heart of what we do. Up until whenever the TEF results came out, we didn't have any pages at this university that talked about teaching and learning. Teaching and learning was all about student recruitment. So we've changed that, and we're now using all the case studies that a lot of people in this room have talked about. We've got a fantastic Department of Education as well. We're not pulling those examples out about what we're doing. So I think that's one thing we can do, is to keep championing, saying there is a space for hearing about teaching and learning in what we're doing. We've got a TEF Gold, we should be really proud of it, and we've got some amazing work. And I think, you know, what you've said here about that collaboration piece, working with Gary, working with Michelle, working with John, working with so many other people, we need to champion a lot more. And I think we need to find a way of, perhaps in different fora, keep championing that it's not just about the research.
I'll put an idea in if you like. There's quite a few of us now that have been promoted as professors who are on teaching and scholarship contracts. That's a set of mentors that could work brilliantly with a set of people around the university who are ripe and ready to take the same move. So I'd like to see that group of people across the university, and many of whom are sitting in the room, starting to do some really valuable mentoring work with those who also want to take that route through their career.
I think it's like the example of this evening. So this is incredibly powerful. So two amazing women standing up, being that role model, but it's not only being the role model, it's being the university giving the space for a celebration of these alternative routes. You know, it's almost like an example of widening participation in action by not only the celebration of the two women being recognised this evening, but also the space and the quality of the audience that is here to listen to that space. But I think we need to widen that. And as Claire's just said, you know, I can take us back to 2012 and that kind of under celebration, exposure, connections, and back to the creative space. So good one for tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for such a very inspiring talk. At the heart of your presentation, the emphasis on students was really inspiring. And I wondered, in some of the work that you've done, focusing on teaching and scholarship, have you experienced the differences in the uptake between ART staff versus teaching and scholarship staff? And how might you sort of create that emphasis on students for both tracks so that you can still achieve your goals?
I think it varies. I think people are people, and I wouldn't say that it necessarily varies along those lines. I think it's In general, I would say that a lot of TNS staff are very focused on the students, but not all of them, and would put that at the heart of what they do. I have amazing colleagues who put students at the heart of what they do, who are also eminent researchers. Alex. So I don't think you can say, but I do think that institutionally we allow people who don't have that sense of vocation to get away with an enormous amount when we earn our money through teaching.
Final question at the back.
Hi Jill, thanks for that. It's been incredible to see your journey and to see the difference that you've influenced over the last 11 years at York. I suppose my question is, where next?
Well, who knows? That's what I mean. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I'm very happy doing what I do as Associate Dean at the moment, and I guess that'll come to an end, but other interesting opportunities kind of pop up, don't they? So where next? Something that involves making a difference to students' lives and working with really interesting people across the institution in order to deliver change together, if that makes sense. That's what I want to do.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to Benita now to close it. I just want to say another round of applause for both of you. And I think just to finish, we've got some real take-home messages from both conversations and both presentations about what we need to do as an institution as well, and keep some of these dialogues going as well. So I think watch this space for what might come next for you two doing more of this.
Thanks, Tracy. So it falls to Catherine and I to say thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for really personal, reflective, and really well theorised as well, kind of accounts of what it means to be a great teacher and a great leader in our higher education. So, yeah, I want to ask you to give them another round of applause because we've got some gifts for you. Also just want to say thank you very much to Tracy for chairing today's event, to staff and Sister for some really lovely introductions. Thank you to Sarah Dace-Hughes. I don't know where Sarah Dace-Hughes is. She's probably gone outside organising, because that's what she does. She organises us all. So I really want to say thank you to her for organising the event, for organising the amazing canapes that are waiting for you all outside, as well as bubbly and soft drinks. And lastly, I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the Department of Education to all of you, friends, families and colleagues. I know there's people who've come from abroad, so thank you very, very much for coming and helping us to celebrate these two fantastic women, these two fantastic professors of teaching and scholarship. So drinks and canapes are outside and we invite you to join us.